Previously on agentpalmer.com, 5 REASONS reasons to watch bad words. Tom Wolfe certainly has the right stuff to open the space race, and if you didn't get a copy of Legends and Lattes yet, it's been re-released. This is the Palmer Files, episode 84, with math teacher and Eduverse podcaster on unprofessional development, Mr. Mealey. We talk about his path to teaching, education, staff rooms, grading, class size, pretty much anything you've ever heard anyone complain about insofar as education is concerned, you'll hear us touch on, excepting budgets. We don't go there, but we go everywhere else. Are you ready? Let's do the show. Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 84th episode is Mealey, a teacher by day and co-host of the Unprofessional Development podcast by night. The podcast is inextricably tied to his profession as a teacher, as he and his co-host and various guests from the Eduverse discuss education from their perspectives, that is, teachers and administrators telling war stories. It's basically like being in the teacher's lounge. I reached out to him because I feel it's important to talk to and elevate teachers. They don't get enough credit and often receive more of the blame and criticism than is warranted. We, of course, talk about education and teaching, but there is a lot in here that you will appreciate no matter who you are. You'll hear us discuss grading and those kids today. We talk about what kind of students each of us were and how that shaped us. We also cover making the lessons real-life applicable, overcoming obstacles, and perhaps we'll even show our work as to how we got our answers. All of that and a whole lot more is coming your way shortly. But first, if you want to discuss this episode as you listen or afterwards, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Mealey at Unprocast, that's UNPROCAST, and this show at the Palmer Files. You can find more information about the Unprofessional Development Podcast at podpage.com/unprofessional-development. And don't forget, you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com. And of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, class is in session. Mealey, you are currently a teacher.
Yes.
And I feel like you should probably get, I want to say thank you for doing that.
Oh, yes. Appreciate that.
It feels like there aren't enough people in that profession ever.
It's true. It's true. It's true.
And you have a podcast where you talk to teachers.
Yes.
Or other educators, I should say.
Yeah. People in the education field, we call it the Eduverse. And some people are like in your normal K to 12 schools, and some people are professional trainers, and some people are administrators or college professors and stuff like that. But the majority of K to 12 are people who support K to 12 people, maybe through they have like some kind of a program or book or whatever, something like that. Yes. And of course, and I have to name drop and the one time we had Tony Danza on the podcast too.
That's fair. That's fair. What was the angle on having Tony on?
So Tony taught for a year in a Philadelphia public school. So when he had gone to college before he got his big break, and was, he did some athletic stuff, but before he was like, an entertainer, he had gone to college to be a teacher, and he'd always kind of felt the calling to do that. And so at some point when he was close to 60, he kind of had to scratch that itch. And so he went and taught in a public school for a year. And I happen to remember that when we started our podcast, because I'd seen him on Oprah talking about it. And the pandemic really helped out because he wasn't doing anything. No one.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I said, hey, he taught outside of Philadelphia. In Philadelphia schools. I'm from the suburbs of Philly. Maybe I'm enough degrees of separation that I can get to Tony Danza. So I say to my Facebook, I said, hey, I've got a podcast. I want Tony Danza on. Who who can
help me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one person said, hey, my friend taught at the school where he taught. I'm going to reach out to her. And then she reaches out to her. She's like, hey, I didn't really know Tony, but so-and-so was the guidance counselor then. I think she knows Tony. I talked to the guidance counselor. She's like, hey, my job, this is funny that they gave her this job. They were worried about Tony Danza coming in and teaching and parents complaining that their kids weren't getting like a real education. So her job was like, instead of, she had the 25 kids that he had, he only taught one class. Like they were her responsibility to continually check in with Tony and check in with those kids that everything's going right. And she said, okay, so I knew him kind of well, but since he left a few years, he only did 1 year and it's been a few years. I don't really know him, but so-and-so, he knows Tony really well. They became friends. I said, okay, well, put me in touch with him. Put me in touch with this guy. I said, hey, so-and-so says, Tony. I said, I don't want you to ruin your friendship with him. I said, by, asking him stuff. I said, I would love to have him on my podcast. So if you don't mind asking him, ask him.
Okay.
He asked Tony. Tony's like, sure, I'll do it. And we're like, oh my God, like this is really happening. And so, got in touch with him. And I mean, I've got his phone number. We text not a lot, but every once in a while and send him emails and stuff like that. And he was just a fantastic guy. It's a very surprisingly emotional episode. It was a very, very he's got a teacher's heart. He really, really got into it. And if you ever get a chance to listen to the episode, if you're a Tony Danza fan or a teacher fan, it's a very interesting episode because he really, really enjoyed his experience and he really fell in love with the kids that he taught. And it was a really big thing for him.
Well, this allows me a fun segue, right? Because you were not a teacher from the get-go. It's not like you went to school for it and became a teacher.
Yeah. I'm basically just like Tony Danza.
So the question is, growing up outside of the classroom, right?
Right.
We saw teachers in media all the time.
Yeah.
Do you have a go-to? Like if I said like, all right, 16-year-old Mealey, picture a classroom that's not the one you're going to, based on the media. Like,
right.
Do you have a go-to? Like, oh, I'm going Saved by the Bell or, Older Than That, Welcome Back, Kotter.
But people ask me like, who's my favorite, fictional teacher? And I've got a couple. Yoda is like the standby because I mean I really think that just how he developed and I think Mr. Miyagi is an excellent teacher.
Okay.
And just how he would use things. So the biggest question kids ask is when am I going to use this in real life, right?
Okay.
And so Mr. Miyagi is a perfect example of that. You think you're just sanding washing the car, wax on, wax off, sand the fence, paint the fence, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And what he's actually doing is training you to use these muscles that you're going to use in the actual fight.
Yeah.
And so as a teacher, like, you don't use the quadratic formula. You don't use, 99% of what you used in school. But my job is to like stretch your brain, to have you critically think, to have you learn how to problem solve, identify patterns, recognize things, to, work with others, all the kind of things that we do in school that, aren't necessarily content related, but we build your brain. So that's kind of what I kind of think of is developing those parts of your brain that you're going to use in real life. Does that make sense?
No, it does, and and this comes up every time I talk to a teacher or somebody in education, right?
Yeah.
I went to a rural school, high school. I was lucky enough to get out of there after 2.5 years because I had the second half of my junior year, I was abroad and I came back and I got an early admit into college. So by the time I finished my freshman year of college, I had my credits kind of transferred backwards. And so I ended I entered my sophomore year with the high school diploma. Right. But I always like to say, like, I learned more out of the classroom, even with my higher ed, than I did in the classroom. And some of it was teachers, absolutely, like clubs and that kind of stuff. And that was maybe because it ended up being more practical. Like I fell into being like involved on my college campus.
Yeah.
Not on purpose. It was very happenstance at the very beginning. But like those are skills that I still use to this day. And they're like, oh, you're going to run a meeting. Like, wait, what? Look, because of all of what I just said, I was a 17-year-old college freshman. So entering my sophomore year, when I actually start getting involved on campus, I'm barely 18.
Yeah.
You know, I'm still the youngest kid. And they're like, well, now you're in charge of this club. You're going to run a meeting. Like, what is an 18-year-old sophomore gonna like? Talk about getting
what is a meeting? How does it? What's the beginning, middle, and end of a meeting? Right.
And you're just thrown into the fire, right? And I think part of it was my attitude. I probably wasn't as open-minded as I would be now. Okay, right. And I think that's age, 100%, or maturity or whatever. But in high school, it was a rural high school. I don't know. I was just. They want you to fit in the box. They want the Stepford children. They really do, right? Like I get to say that my high school was the quote unquote big high school because we were in the county seat. All right. And so that's nothing compared to a big city, right?
Right.
But for rural counties, that is the big city.
FYI, we have 3,500 kids at my school. It's insane.
Well, here's the question.
That's way too many.
I think my graduating class is I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it had to be under 300, and it was in an area where it was kind of continuing to grow. Like every class kind of started to get bigger. But it was in that 250, 300 range, my graduating class.
Where pretty much at least everyone knows everybody. There might be one kid's name you don't know, but pretty much everyone knows everybody.
Yes. Yeah. And I moved into that school district in like fourth grade, right? Yeah. So, and I still kind of, even the people you don't know,
Right. You know who they are. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know, like, would smaller class sizes have helped me? I don't know. Would bigger, where I could have gotten a little. See, the problem is I had class sizes that ranged from 18 to 30. So I was either extremely vulnerable and had nowhere to hide, or I didn't know how to hide in a classroom of 30.
Yeah.
I would have been a problem student. And that's probably why I have so much respect for teachers now.
Yeah.
Can I ask,
in fact, Tony Danza, the name of Tony Danza's book was I apologize to all the teachers I've ever had. That's the name of his book that he wrote about teaching. You know what I mean? Because he realized from the other side, like, oh my goodness, like this is like really a lot harder than I realized.
Can you divulge, like, were you a good student, a problem student?
I was not a good student at all.
Okay.
I didn't fit into the system very well. I was I was blessed with however you want to like measure it, pretty good intelligence. I read a lot as a kid, and I was always able to get A's on tests. But I went to school in the late 70s and the 80s. I graduated high school 87, and homework was such a huge part of what school was back then that I would get C's and D's because homework counted like 40%, 50% or whatever, some insane amount.
Look, you and I are separated by about a decade or two, and I'm your clone, right? Like, because I had the intelligence to be able to maybe not get an A, but it was B or higher on the test.
Right.
But my downfall wasn't homework so much. I had gamed the system enough that I could do math homework in Latin, right? Like I could walk out of school with 95% of my homework done. My problem was the math mentality that kind of spread to every other subject, which was show your work.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm gathering the concept. Or my favorite example, which is still the downfall of me, which is the English part, which is read this book.
Yeah.
Okay. It's about a guy who owns a farm. Well, what was the name of his oxen? I don't remember. That's a detail I don't remember. Well, then clearly you didn't read the material. It's like, hold on, wait a minute. So like I was that student where like
I call those gotcha questions, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that part of it goes back to they wanted Stepford students, and they had enough Stepford students where I was just the outlier, right? I think that that's part of it. Your podcast takes us into the quote unquote staff room,
right?
Of a shared universe of educators. And I was trying to think in preparation for this, like, have I ever either, after school or in school, have I ever set foot in the staff room? Right.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think maybe once, right?
Yeah.
And I will tell you that from the little I remember, it smelled of coffee and cigarettes.
Right. Yeah. It's not very glorious. So I mean, I have a big school. We have probably about 4 or 5 different staff rooms, and some of them have changed and at various times, and the PTSA blessed us at one time, and then now what used to be the staff room is used for another purpose for offices, and so the teachers aren't in there. There's guidance counselors and other secretaries and stuff like that. And no, it's very often like, I mean, schools in general, they're built very similar to prisons, and it's just very industrial furniture and all this kind of stuff, and occasionally there's some comfortable stuff, but but yeah, no, it's full of copiers that are possibly broken and all that stuff. Now, one thing that I did do, this is like pre-COVID, I'm going to try and bring it back, is I was in the main office, and I'm looking, and on top of like a file cabinet, there's this big popcorn machine, like movie theater size popcorn machine.
Okay.
I said, what's that doing there? I said, and why isn't that in the staff room?
Yeah. Okay.
And they're like, well, that belongs to so-and-so. She had it here we had an event, and it's just been here, and they use it sometimes at football games or a dance or something like that. I said, okay, so like, how do I get it? And then I had to like go through a bunch of bureaucracy of, can I get permission to move this to there? And what if I do this? And then how do I get like all this kind of stuff? And then I went and found, where do you get like the popcorn from in my city and all this kind of stuff. But after about it took me like literally months, you know what I mean? And finally I got it up and running, and I created Popcorn Wednesdays. And so every Wednesday you would go in the staff room, and there was a different teacher every period that had their planning period that I assigned to be in charge of popping the popcorn. You'd go in there, and it smelled like a movie theater then, and there was fresh popcorn for everybody. And I try to create a sense of collegiality through that. And so I'm trying to bring it back. I'm trying to figure out a good location in our school, because our school is overcrowded, and they have taken away some of the common areas for teachers to just gather and hang out and chat. And they're now like offices for individuals that we can't go in without disturbing those people. And so, yeah.
So the question I have, and look, I understand that we're not going to solve the politics of education funding, and we're not going to go there, but I did want to ask from a mental capacity, or in a mental capacity.
Yeah.
When these staff rooms, okay, which, as a student, we're off limits. When these staff rooms are made into offices, do you have a moment? Like, is there a moment in the day and a place where you can go as more students get into the classroom and into the school, where you can, I don't know, break down? Like, I immediately, and as I say this, right, and it's different, I immediately think of like the early seasons of Scrubs, where like JD
would, like in the closet.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, is that like, if you need to break down for whatever reason, or just need a moment to yourself, like, do you even have that space?
Currently, right now, not. There has been often in the past, and they are in my area building new schools to deal with the overcrowding, and
Okay.
hopefully in a year or two it's gonna be resolved. But currently, not now. You can go to your car, I guess, is an option. There's a couple little spots that I know some nooks and crannies that I could go if I needed to, but they're not exactly my school is built like a small community college. So I would have to trek,
Okay.
5-7 minutes across campus and then have to plan on getting back in time for that. But there's another thing that's happening right now, and we can if this is germane or not, I don't know, is that so teachers have been quitting. Like I said, we're not going to solve that problem. So and I don't know if at your school they had this. When I say a floating teacher, do you know what I mean?
I mean, I don't think I ever had a floating teacher. I knew that there were some what I would call semi-permanent substitutes, which might be
Yeah.
the same thing.
No.
No, okay.
So here's what they've decided that some genius came up with this at some point. They go, well, you know, Mrs. Johnson during second period, she doesn't have a class. So why don't we have another teacher go into their room during second period, and then that teacher could go into
Oh
Mr.
boy.
Mr. So and so's room during third period, and they can go across campus to this room during, and so they finagled that. And so there are and I've been a floater. I've floated a couple times to where you don't have a classroom, and you are in and out of other classrooms, which is one of the reasons why some teachers don't get a break, because they're displaced during their planning period because there's someone coming into the room. So what happened this year is there was a teacher that was going to be floating into my room, and he quit a week before school started.
Okay. Okay, hold on. We're going to I have something I want to get back to, but continue.
Yeah. Go where you want to go. Yeah.
The real question here is we know teachers are leaving the profession.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily glamorous if you don't have a passion for teaching. Like, I will tell you, a lot of the people that I went to high school with got degrees in like ECE and stuff because they thought it would be easy, and very few of them actually remained in education in any capacity.
Yeah.
When somebody, like, with the people that are leaving, is the 2 weeks before school starts like common?
It's not uncommon, and there's people that leave sometimes mid-year.
So not every teacher's like, I'm gonna tough out the rest of this school year or semester even.
No. And I understand that as well. I would love them to tough out the school year, right? But I've had multiple people that they sometimes try to okay, I'm going to try and make it happen at the semester turn. You know what I mean? But sometimes there's an opportunity, and they're just like, I'm taking the opportunity, and they'll figure it out when I'm gone. And they weren't really concerned about me when I was there, so why should I really be concerned about them when I leave? And I'm like, yeah, no, I get that. They feel a little bit of guilt for their fellow teachers because they know that we are going to have to
pick up the slack.
The slack. There's the way it happens is there's either a long-term sub. Sometimes they do what they call something like disperse classes. So we go, okay, their class was only 25 kids. If we can find 5 teachers that can fit 5 more kids, and we'll cram those classes to 35 or 40, you know what I mean, to kind of do something like that. I know a teacher that one year taught a double class. They found a space that could house 60 kids, and he taught like 60 kids, one block for a semester, so
okay.
They gave him an assistant. So there was a sub that was designated for that class that didn't know how to teach the subject. So he's like, you're just going to here's the answer key. You're just going to grade papers for me and keep kids on task as best as you can. But for the most part, I'm going to be the one teaching the class. So there's a lot of higgledy-piggledy stuff going on.
So I want to get back to the floater. Did you make a space in your classroom for the floater?
I generally do. I try to give them some board space where they can put, things that they want to write on the board. And if they want a shelf or a drawer or something like that, then I do that. They generally don't want too much because you end up not knowing where your things are. Sometimes you have either like a big like they make these, it's like a milk crate, but it's got a handle that pops out like an airplane bag handle,
Yeah.
and you carry that around, or like some kind of cart with wheels that has like a AV cart that you kind of roll around and put your junk on that. But when I floated, I would always leave. Like I would collect up the papers, and then a kid would ask me a question, and I'd set the papers down, not on my cart or in my cart, just on a random flat
Desk. Yep.
surface. And then you go help a kid that's asking a question, and you go to his desk, you come back, the bell rings, you grab your cart or your bag, and you leave. And then you get to the next room, you go, oh, where are those papers? Where's that thing? You know what I mean? And like, it's like, oh, it's either this room or that room. It's wild.
It feels to me, and I've talked to people on this podcast that have left the profession and left other professions to go into teaching.
Yeah.
The people that do it, generally speaking, in education, feel like two kinds of people. A, they have a passion for teaching.
Yeah.
Or B, they can't do anything else, so they're stuck there, right? And it feels like
there's both of those. Yeah.
I don't ever, and look, I'm not in and amongst the teachers, right? Like I come from a family of teachers that are all since retired. But
yes, you've heard the stories, right?
It feels like those are the two things that we have right now. And if, the people that have a passion still want to pay their bills, so that's one of the reasons they leave. But the people that are stuck there, I mean, like as a teacher, okay? And look, I mean, parents and students can kind of tell when a teacher's going through the motion, but can teacher
yes.
How do other teachers handle like, oh, that's so-and-so, they're just, reading doing the same book they read 20 years ago off the same notes.
The sad part is the ones that like, I'll be like, we'll have this conversation among the teachers that are the passionate teachers. And I'll say to them, do you think Mrs. Johnson even likes kids? And they'll be like, I don't think she does. You know what I mean? And they literally hate kids, and they'll like, when they're in the staff room, they will be complaining. You have to distance yourself from those people so that you don't like pick up on that too much. But they'll be just like, oh, these kids and da 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 da. Like I had a conversation with this teacher like, a while back, and we were discussing grades and grading and why this grade is that and why you shouldn't do this grade wise. And I can get into that kind of details with that. There's I'm part of what's something called an ungrading movement, but there's also this issue where finally some people could do the math and realize that giving zeros on assignments is really punitive and doesn't work out fairly. And we can kind of delve into that. But this teacher was like, well, the kids today are da 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 da. And that's what I said. If you were saying the kids today, you need to get out. You're too old. I said, because can I tell you something? I said, I went to school in the 80s, and there were kids getting drunk in the hallway and making out in the bathroom back then. There were kids putting smoke bombs in the bathroom and cheating on homework. And I mean, it ain't nothing new. You can go back to, I said, who was really good? The kids in the
40s,
in the 1890s. Those were the good kids, weren't they? I'm like, get out of here with this. Kids are kids every year. It's just someone said to me, same girl, different dress. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean,
now before it was gum, now it's phones, whatever, same thing.
I went to school in the 90s, and I'm pretty sure there was a smoking spot. Like, and it wasn't like nobody questioned how they got them. That's just, there was a spot. It was outside. It wasn't, you can't smoke indoors. Like, it was outside, and that was where you went. And I mean, I'm the generation that got changed while I was in high school or middle school by like the Columbines and all that kind of stuff. And it was, my friend who was a minority who wore a trench coat got told not to stop wearing trench coats just because he's the nicest guy, still writes poetry to this day, wouldn't hurt a soul, but they were, optics, right? But I want to get back to the grading thing, because I like the idea of pass fail, although I hate it. I think pass fail is the best option we have because you either understand the material or you don't.
Right.
I have a problem when we start working on degrees of comprehension because I feel like that there's so much that gets left behind in that regard. Is that kind of
right? Well, someone posted this on Twitter just the other day. So there's this one kid, right? There's 10 assignments. Kid A gets 7 out of 10 right and does all 10 assignments. Kid B does 7 assignments and gets them 100% correct, but doesn't feel like doing the other 3. Both of them now have a 70 in the class. Like, they're not the same kid.
Yeah, or my favorite, which was like, don't forget the final will be 70% of your grade. All right, well then I'll just concentrate on. If I pass that, I don't have to do anything for the rest of the year.
Right. And I mean, and that one blows my mind too. Like, I now have the luxury. I don't give a state test. There's state test in my school, but I don't have to give a state test. I give my final that I create, and I get to grade it. And if you get to grade it, like the state puts a crazy curve on the state test anyway, so that's the other story. But I get to put whatever curve I want on there.
Okay.
And so I explained to kids. I said this is my curve, and this is what happens. And here's what I do in grading in general. And this is kind of like a thing that I'm doing, kind of like below the radar, but I don't mind talking about it. So when they take my test, I just give feedback. I don't put a number on the test. Okay. I just say, this is wrong. You need to fix this. And they're allowed to do corrections and redo it. It can be like, even though it's a math test, we can consider it a rough draft the first thing they head into me, and they can change. And then at the end of the day, at some point, I have a conversation with each kid, and I go, hey, what do you think you should get on this test based on what you know, how you've done it, and what you've done? And the kid tells me, I think I should have an 85. I think I should have a 90. I think I should have a 65. And I go, and that's the grade we're going to put in the grade book.
Okay.
And when I first did this, I was scared because like, oh my goodness, what if all the kids just give themselves 100? But they don't. Like, if I would ask you how good a podcaster you are, what are you going to give yourself as a grade?
I mean, probably somewhere in the 70s, I would guess.
Right.
Like, because I know all the things I still like. Yeah, okay, the product is good, but I think on marketing, there's a I don't know what the teacher language would be, like room to grow, or like so there's always more.
Right. And we always judge ourselves more harshly than the outsiders would judge us. You know what I mean? If you would ask someone, hey, do you think you're pretty, or do you think you're handsome? They're gonna be like, oh, I'm like this. You know, we got some narcissists out there, but in general, people are going to lowball themselves. So the kids do the same thing with the grades. And I have to actually like explain to them, well, but no, you did this, and you know how to do this, and blah, blah, blah. And so at the end of the semester, I tell them, I said, this is how it's going to go. There's going to be a final exam. I said, but we have worked together for 90 days because we're on block scheduling. It's just a semester. I have them for the semester. I said, we've worked together for 90 days. You doing a lot of work, me doing teaching, giving you feedback. We've been like figuring it out to determine that your grade is an 84 in this class.
Okay.
I said, why would a 3-hour test on Tuesday change my opinion or your opinion of that? I said, so the lowest I will give you is your current grade. I said, if you blow the test out of the water and you get 100, I'll put the 100 in. I said, but if you have a bad day, your girlfriend breaks up with you the night before, I don't say this to them, but like this happens. Like there's kids that come in to take that test that counts a huge part of their grade. And dad came in drunk from his girlfriend's house, and mom and dad were arguing at like insane levels till 3 a.m. And then this kid has to get up at 7 a.m. and like take this test and try not to think and try to focus on world history or whatever. I'm like, that's not fair. Give them like the semester to kind of balance the stuff that happens in life. And so I'm like, so if you get a 30 on my final, I change it to an 84 and we just go on.
Yeah,
and the kids actually go, so what if I don't actually take the final and I've got a 90 in your class? What will I get?
Sure, yeah,
like,
that's me. I'm asking that question.
Yeah. I said you'll get a 90. So if I don't come to school that day, you'll put a 90 down for the final? I said, have I lied to you yet? no. I said, do you want me to actually put it in there right now? They're like, really? I'm like, I don't care. So this it's just a number I'm sticking in a computer. I know you've been trained to think that this is some kind of like monumental thing, but like, do you know what you got in 10th grade English? Like whether it was a B or a C or an A? Maybe, but probably not all of them.
Yeah, no, I mean that it's
And no one's asked you since.
well, that's the thing, right? Like I remember my first resume out of college. I'm a
Mhm.
college graduate.
Yeah.
And you don't have a lot, and you put your GPA on
GPA
there.
down,
Nobody's ever like, I really should have done this experiment back then. I'm too old to pull it off now, but like I should have just made stuff up. Like, oh, I had a 7.0. Nobody's gonna
Right.
nobody has
No.
ever asked me about that. Like
No.
my first professional job I got because I taught myself to code while working in retail for 7 years.
Yeah.
And that was a very applicable skill to the job I applied for and then got, right?
Yeah.
I was a liberal arts major, right? Like
Right.
that was so far beyond what I had went to school for
Yeah.
and learned in school. But I still know, like, I don't have kids, but I've got friends that have kids that, I hear about what they're teaching and what they're learning. And I just go like, it feels like it hasn't changed. Like I know, okay, that in my lifetime, I went from a freshman in college, which would have been my senior year in high school, having a brick Nokia as like just for emergencies only, and we were paying per minute and per text.
By the minute, right? Exactly.
And now there's a computer in my pocket most days, right?
Yep.
How is it possible that your kid, who wasn't even alive then, is having a very similar educational experience that I am? Does that frustrate teachers too? Like,
of course it does. Of course it does. And and that was part of the argument that I had with that teacher. So, my district has instituted this policy, okay? So that that they've kind of like gone with it and then they backed away from it because teachers have resisted, but they try to put it in there, okay? Where the lowest you could give a kid was a 50, right? And the reason being, and I'll just do some real simple math for you, okay? Sure. If you get an A, like for social studies, you get a 4. And then if you get an F in English, you get a 0. You average those together, your GPA is now 2.0.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. So why, if a kid gets 100 on one test, and then if you give him a 0 on something that he doesn't complete or he fails, you average those together, he's now got a 50. And now the kid has literally got 100 on one. I mean, his GPA is now a 0. So why don't, and I don't know how we ever got on this 100-point scale that someone decided to do. I'm like, why don't we have the 4-point scale for every assignment and every test? So the solution to that was, okay, so we just make 50 the bottom. But that messes with people's heads. So like, well, they didn't do anything. They didn't get 50% right. Why would I give them a 50? Well, we give them the 50 because with the average of the 100 and the 50, it gets 75. Yeah. Yeah, but what about the kid who actually got a 50? That's not fair because he did more than the kid who got the 0. And now and it's all this whole want to do this whole fairness thing. And I'm like, well, the 100-point scale system is not fair to begin with. So I don't know why you're trying to like make things fair.
Fair, yeah. Right.
And so then the question came, like, she's like, well, I got this kid because I'm giving him 50s, and then he got like a 90 on my test. I said, well, if you got a 90 on your test, he obviously has a good level of mastery of the material.
Yes.
And then the teacher's like, well, the test was too easy. I said, whose fault is that?
Yeah.
Because that's not the kid's fault. He's like, well, blah, blah, blah. It was online and the kids could Google the answers. I said, well, everyone can Google every answer right now. I said, you have to create a test where the answers aren't Googleable. Make them compare and contrast something or whatever they need to do. And if they can Google it, then it's not a good test question.
It's so weird that we're here because
but it's hard to create test questions that aren't Googleable. It's much easier to go, what day was the Magna Carta signed?
Yeah, but as an example, haven't the answers been in the back of math books since like the beginning of time, right? Like I mean, you know, it's hard to get away with looking at the back in the middle of a test, but like you know the answers are back there.
Yeah.
So
but then you can ask a question like I'll go with the math one in a minute ago. Ask the question. You go, what do you think would happen if the Declaration of Independence wasn't signed, or this bill was not in the Bill of Rights, and just tell me what you think would happen, and then you show me you actually understand what we're talking about, rather than just going, what's the Fourth Amendment, or who was president in 1978, or whatever it is. And then with math, you know, you have to go, here's a problem. What's a mistake someone could make when they're solving this problem? Or something I do is, they can still Google it, but they still have to know how to do it. So I create math problems with no numbers in them. I put boxes where the numbers go, and each kid has to put random numbers in there. So you might put a 7 and I put a 9 and this kid puts a 3, you know, and so instead of having like 26, you've got 34. And so now each problem is different. And now I can kind of see, you know, now it's a little less Googleable, or you have to kind of just show some level of understanding to do it.
So as a math teacher, you have the thankless job of being stuck answering the question, what could I possibly use this for? Right. And this is what grades do you teach?
I teach seniors now.
Okay,
I taught 10th and 11th grade, but I teach seniors now.
So seniors are a little bit easier because at the very least by then we know if they have an interest in something where the math may be applicable. Yeah. I remember, and this goes back to me being a bad student. I remember 6th or 7th grade, even when the math was still easy for me. Yeah. Going, I'm never going to need this.
You're not.
Right?
You're not.
And
You're not.
I had teachers that were like, and this is going to get a little soapboxy for a moment. Yeah. I had teachers, and I'm sure you heard this too, because you're older than me, you definitely heard this. Yeah. You need to learn math and science and history and English because you need to be well-rounded. And I kind of maintained that through most of my educational career. The decisions that I made kept me well-rounded. And then I got out into the world and they went, you're not specialized in anything. Well, I'm sorry, but for the last 30 or 40 years, people have been telling me to be well-rounded and not specialize in anything. So I'm sorry, but I'm confused now. Was I supposed to be like, oh, well, you know, I don't need to be well-rounded. And then they all say, well, don't put all your eggs in one basket and blah, blah. I understand where all of it comes from, but it's so confusing when you get out there and they're like, no, pick a thing. Like, nobody told me to pick a lane when I was 16. Yeah. And then, and other countries have you pick a lane a little earlier. You know what I mean? A lot of them do, like somewhere around 15 or 16, they kind of steer you more towards a track. And so there's good and bad in that. And I'll kind of speak to that. So yes, I think there's value in just us having some kind of common, you know, I'm going to say that the word, a common core of of things that we all can reference and know and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. You know, and without getting deep into the political end of it, the real reason behind Common Core was that the colleges were saying, hey, I get this kid from Utah and he hasn't read the same book as the kid from Arkansas, and they don't know the same math as the kid from West Virginia or Ohio. Can we just have like a core of common things that people should know? Yeah. And then bring that to us. And the original idea was the core was going to be very small. There was going to be like this really small thing that everyone would get, and then teachers would have the liberality to add on top of that and go, okay, there's like 30% of what I've got to cover during the year is this thing that everyone's going to cover in every state for 10th graders. Yeah. And then I can go and say, here's some other things that I find are interesting, worthwhile, useful, whatever that I can add to that. But then what happens is when you get a group of educators in a room and say, what should be in the social studies curriculum? They can't kill their babies. Okay. And they're like, they have to know this. Well, I learned this. Well, they're going to have to know this. It's like, no, they actually don't have to know all of it. Like let's just, and they can learn it.
all of it has value to somebody at some point, but we don't need to have but we don't need all of it. And so, but I do think that there is value in, going to the buffet and tasting everything and see what you like, and then decide, hey, I'm going to go back and get some more helpings of this. And I do think that somewhere 13, 14, 15, that you can maybe help them guide. Now, one thing, and we're kind of getting back to some opportunities with trades, but what happened also with the trades to some degree is there was implicit bias that some admins, guidance counselors, teachers had, and go, oh, well, that's the poor kid or the minority kid or whatever.
Yeah.
Stick them in the trade school. And meanwhile, he has the rocket scientist, brain surgeon brain, but because maybe he got in a fight one time or got caught in that little smoking area you were talking about or whatever, send him on to teach him how to weld or do electricity and all that. And so then they threw the baby out with the bathwater and said, we're not doing any of that because everyone needs to be college ready now, which is silliness, which is another, the pendulum swung way into another silly world. Everyone doesn't need to be college ready.
Is there a very prevalent us versus them mentality for the faculty versus the administration? Is that a thing?
In most places it is. And it depends on the admin. I happen to work for an admin right now, which I love, which understands that if you give teachers as much freedom as you can, that they will do good things for the students, that you do not need to be on their back, that most of them are the passionate people that we talked about, that will do their job. And making rules and micromanaging isn't going to get the cranky ones to be any better at teaching. It's just going to make them crankier.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I have to ask though, you haven't always been a teacher and you're currently a teacher.
Yes.
What keeps you a teacher?
Okay. So, I'll kind of talk about what brought me into the profession. So I also come from a family of teachers. My dad taught for 38 years. My brother is a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. My mom taught briefly before she got married. I have a cousin who's a teacher. So as a young rebellious youth, I figured I'm doing anything but what Dad does. You know what I mean? Yep. So I went out and I went to college, and I flunked out of college my first time because I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. Yeah. And then I happened to be
by the way, before I let you get too far, it wasn't age, by the way. I mean, I just told you I skipped my senior year of high school. I was on academic probation after my first semester, and I spent every waking minute after that making up for it. But I think part of it, some of it might have been age and immaturity, but I think the other part of it was I didn't have a goal. Right. Yeah, and when you don't have a goal, and I don't care if it's academically or not. Think about your house. I don't have to clean up because I'm not having company. So I'm not gonna. Or versus somebody's coming over. You have a goal. And that's super important, especially academically.
And particularly at college when if you just want to sit around and watch TV or go hang out with your friends, there's always someone to goof off with, and always at college, you know what I mean? I would just I had a round robin of friends. They'd be like, "Oh, I can't hang out with you tonight. I got this thing going on." And I just go to the next guy or gal, and I'd goof off with them, and then the guy that was studying for his test the night before, he'd be free the next night, and I'd goof,
There's always something.
Right. And so then I flunked out of college, and I hung out with my college buddies for a while, and then I ended up getting some basically some menial jobs, and then I started getting into speaking of the trades. I got into trades. I was exterminator, so I at least had a decent living, and I had a neighbor, and I don't know how she knew I was good at math. I have no idea how she figured that out or how it happened in conversation, but she knew I was good at math. Okay. And she was taking some classes at the local community college, and she was taking freshman algebra or whatever it was. And she's like, I don't get this. Can you you're good at math. Can you help me out? And I'm like, I'm good at yes, I am good at math. Sure. Let's let me take a look. You know what I mean? And I looked at the book, and I looked at the answers in the back of the book and tried to extrapolate how do we get from point A to point B, and looked at it, and I said, okay, first you take this and you do this and you need to do this. And she had this aha moment. She's like, oh my goodness, I get it. And then she says to me the words that like still ring to me all the time. She's like, "You explain that better than my teacher." And like, I just, I'm gonna give, I'm like, I don't like preach a lot, I'm a Christian. I believe that like there's like, like a purpose for my life. And at that point, I really felt like a call, and as if like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing this. Like I need to like get in the classroom. And it was a long road till I got in the classroom because I had like along the way I got married and had kids, and I was having to pay bills, and then I had to like I got a associate's degree, and then I had to go online, and online learning when I first went was not what it is now. It was really
so you've
new.
Overcome a ton of obstacles to get exactly where you didn't expect or want to be way back when the first decision could have been made easily.
Yeah. No, it's funny because there's a guy that literally graduated high school year before me that is retiring this year, and he could have retired last year. He was just he's just like been milking it. I'm 53 years old, and I'm like, oh, I got like 12 years. I can't retire for like for a long time here. If I'm gonna, that's the one benefits if you're thinking about going to teaching. There is some really good retirement benefits. I mean, particularly if you were, I'm in North Carolina. Up north, they're even better. My dad has been collecting 98% of his salary for 20 years. Okay, but as a retired person, so there's some really good stuff when it comes to retirement, but you have to slog through a lot of years of being in a classroom to get there.
So
which is why some of those teachers also, like you're saying, that aren't leaving because they're like, I'm 5 years away, I'm 8 years away from being able to pull X amount of dollars a month for sitting on my butt, and so I can't change now.
But you don't seem to have the handcuffs. So what's keeping you in the profession?
I love kids, and I love seeing learning happen. I really do. Like talking about that my neighbor that did that. I like, what I mean? I had a kid today, and one of the ways I explain teaching is have you got taught to ride a bike, or have you ever taught anyone to ride a bike? Do you have much recollection of that experience?
I don't. But I do know I've taught people things.
Okay. So when you teach someone to ride a bike, a kid, right?
Yeah.
When you first start off, you normally have your hand on the seat, and your hand on one of the handlebars, and you're just getting them to kind of pedal, right?
Yep.
And then you kind of let go of the handlebar, and you just hold on to the seat, and you kind of guide it. And then at some point, you let go, and they
get it.
But they normally are going to crash as well, right? And then you pick them up and you do it again. And so I try to find that balance because, like, I don't want to be like, I want to like make them struggle, and I want them to wiggle a little bit and like almost feel like they're going to fall down and then help them get back up. But then that joy when they like realize that, oh, he let go of the seat a while back. I've been like riding a bike for like a block now, Oh my God. And that joy. So if you can find that sweet spot to where they call it productive struggle, and you see their brain working really, really hard, and you got to find that tension because at some point they'll give up. Yeah. And that's, you got to know, ask them another question, give them a hint, ask a leading question. How do we what do you notice? Like, what do you think happened to the fore, or what should we do? And depending on the aptitude of the kid, you change how your questions are worded and how much details you give them. And so each kid can kind of get like a unique experience like that. But seeing that and then seeing them, the power that they feel when they've mastered, even if it is something they'll never ever use in their life. It's just like when you solve the Wordle. If you do the Wordle, it's like, oh, I feel like I did something. You know what I mean? It's like, congratulations. It's whatever the word is today. But like, you didn't really do anything. I mean, you did something, but you don't need that skill. But there's that endorphin release, and you get to see that endorphin release, and then you get the endorphin release, and it's just a lot of fun. And as well, now that I've learned, talking about the content and the curriculum, I've realized if I don't get to everything, it's okay. There's like 25 things I'm supposed to teach them. They're only going to remember 2 anyway, like 10 years from now. So if I throw out 3 of them because we we go off on a tangent, we want to learn something different, or we want to have a conversation about something that's going on in their life or the school or the world or whatever, hey, we can do that, and let's just have a good experience, and let's do life together in addition to like learning the math. I mean, I have some liberty there. I can't just do that every day. We're just going to just talk about our lives. I have to, I'd get in trouble if I did that. But if we get off on somewhere, we can go somewhere for a little bit. I was talking to a kid today, like her cousins died in a car crash, and her aunt and uncle have been going through and talking about the fact that her grandmother took them on a cruise to try and help them get over the fact that they just buried their two sons like a week ago. You know what I mean? And that's like, I'm like, does this kid care about the math today? You know what I mean? Like, and if I'm like, and I'll tell him, like, if you need to, if you just need to put in headphones and zone out, like, do that today, because I get that. You know what I mean? Whatever math we get done, we'll get done, and you'll be okay. And if you need to like go like, cry in the hallway, just go out and cry in the hallway,
So I can sit here with my microphone and say that teaching and education needs an overhaul, and some of you may agree and some of you may not. I can say that teachers are underfunded, and again, some of you will agree and some of you may not. I can say that our classrooms are too rigid, our schools need to embrace change, and that universally education needs a higher priority, not only from government officials, but from parents and families. But that's not what I want to do here. What I want to say is that I appreciate teachers more now than I did when I was, quote, in the system, unquote. And while my reading habits are partly to expand my horizons, so is this podcast and the projects I take on. I have met some amazing people as the host of this podcast, and the lessons that I have learned on mic I have shared with you. But I've also learned lessons from my passion projects and consulting gigs as well. Everything, everywhere is a potential learning experience. And if I had had that mindset when I was in the classroom as a much younger man, then perhaps I would be miles ahead of where I am now. But it has taken all this time and all of my experience for me to sit across the microphone from a passionate teacher like Mealey to not only thank him for what he is doing, but to want to understand more of where he is coming from so I can help others understand as well. As humans, our legacy is what we leave behind, and often that is knowledge and another generation that will hopefully stand on our shoulders. Teachers play such an important role in that linear timeline of humanity that we often think of it only in terms of grades and achievement. We shouldn't. Education isn't about grades, it's about understanding. This is something that I have fought for since I was in the educational system as a disenfranchised youth, but it hasn't stopped. Understanding concepts and others is vitally important to our daily lives, and often that understanding comes from teachers. Maybe not even in the educational system. Perhaps it's a brother, a sister, a friend, a boss, a mentor, or a parent who can teach you something. Thank those that have taught you, and don't forget that if you have something to share, you are also a teacher. We are all teachers, and we are all students. Class dismissed. Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 84. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can tweet me at Agent Palmer, Mealey at Unprocast, that's UNPROCAST, and this show at The Palmer Files. You can find more information about the Unprofessional Development Podcast, of which Mealey is a co-host, at podpage.com/unprofessional-development. Email can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer is agentpalmer.com. All right, Mealey, do you have one final question for me?
Yeah, sure. So since we're like, talking about education and that's my craft, I'll go that direction. So, um, I'm giving you a blank check, okay?
All right.
And you are going to use that to fix education. I'm going to say you can't. Salaries is too easy. Okay, so you
All
can't
right.
just say I'm just gonna like give every teacher like double their salary, but you have to apply that blank check in the education field. What are you going to do to make the education field better than it is for teachers and or for students or America?
There's a part of me that immediately thinks about technology and technology inequities because I so my high school was the county seat, which meant that not only were we one of the bigger towns in my county, but we probably had the most money in my county. I'm just speculating, but it's not based on the people I met afterwards that were in surrounding school districts.
It's pretty believable.
We had all the money. And so I think that's part of it. But I really think that, finding a way to pay school boards with, and this is a very important thing, with term limits. Okay. Because I think back to my educational experience, which albeit is colored by a few events that I've talked about on this show previous, but for the most part, I think that the school board is where a lot of these decisions get made. And if you could, A, pay them, and B, make it term limits, that churn is so important. The school board that was in charge of my high school experience was incestuous at best, by legitimate blood relations. I'm not even talking like by marriage. I'm talking like, oh, that's the superintendent's sister. Oh, and they sit, because they're related, they sit on these boards forever, which means if you want something done and so-and-so's against it, like, oh, we should put tablets in front of every kid. Oh, but that's not fair to the rich kids who already have a tablet or whatever. Take your pick. If they have one thing that they're against, and it might seem progressive in a general sense, and they're against it, they're there as long as they want. And I feel like if you pay school boards and add term limits, there's an impetus to get something done instead of just sitting there for 10 or 20 years. And if I can't pay the teachers, I'm paying the school board and I'm setting term limits.
Okay.
I don't know
I think that's not a terrible idea. I'll say also, particularly in smaller districts like you're talking about with those school boards, and I've talked to multiple teachers who have this. If you get on the wrong side of the school board just because you like parked in their spot at church, or
it could be the littlest thing.
You failed their kid because their kid was a moron or didn't do his work, then you as a teacher are going to have a rough time as well. And they I think scapegoat people and attack people sometimes too with unjustifiably. I'm sure there's sometimes they come after some people who need to be out, but I've heard too many horror stories.
I think that's the other thing too. It's the school board. I think that term limits kind of allows a few of those. Well, my daughter just graduated from college. I'll let her be a substitute and get the first position open. Well, guess what? In 4 years, you won't be on the school board anymore, and you won't be able to protect your daughter who's just an idiot or whatever. Like, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but that kind of stuff, especially on a smaller scale, in a rural area, that happens so much. And I think the school board has so much power, but if you don't have that churn, if there are people sitting there for 6, 8, 10 years, even if they're great, you're going to get rid of more of the bad stuff than you're going to lose of the good, I think, generally. So, but that's my answer to your question. I still think we need to pay teachers more. Like I still want that to be part of the equation. But if not, having an active board that gets paid and has a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, this is not just a cushy seat for however long you feel like it.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of paying teachers more, I tweeted this out about 6 months or so ago. I crunched the numbers, and I think it was like maybe a tenth of the federal, a tenth of a percent of the federal budget, and you could give every teacher a $5K tax credit.
Yeah,
and then like boom, every other teacher has like, that's $5,000 a year is a game changer for a lot of teachers. You know what I mean? And then you have that extra $5,000, and because the federal government, teachers, most people, and some people are like, oh, the federal government doesn't pay much of our salaries. It's state and local that pay the teacher salaries.
I also think that when you get into that kind of math, it's where, and this is no fault of yours, so I don't want to cast aspersions, but like, it's where I feel like the average American fails math is like, numbers get put in front of them. Yeah. That may seem big, $1 billion, right? Or 85,000, or 3,500, whatever. There's big numbers that get thrown in front of them. And look, I think part of it, it's not just math. Part of it's just basic intelligence. Yeah. The intelligent person is going to go 1 billion out of what? 1 billion out of Jeff Bezos. He doesn't care. 1 billion out of every American. Now we're talking about $1 a person, $2, 50 cents a person. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's a level of comprehension when these things get put out that like, it scares off most people. Yeah. And I think, some people want them dumb. That's a whole ball of wax. Yeah. But you all deserve a raise, and that's just there should be no argument there.
Yeah. All right. So now I'll kind of follow that up. Okay. So now you're putting the school board. So let's say there's still left money. How do you think we should handle the kids who are both, and see if think financially or outside the box what you think should happen? Yeah. You as a kid, there's a kid that will take half a year to learn what's normally taught in a year, and another kid that it takes a year and a half to learn what's taught in a year, right? Yeah. So now, what should we do about that? Should we just have them in the same class and just teach to the middle, or and then pass the kid that doesn't even learn it, or what do you think we should do?
I don't know, and I'll tell you why. Because from my personal experience, I was when I moved. Okay, I moved after my third grade year and into fourth grade year. Yeah, I was getting ready to be tested for whatever the gifted program happened to be where I was. And because of my lack of grades, my first year in my new school, they didn't give me the gifted test. A lot of that had to do with politics. More than anything, it had to do with the fact that they weren't engaging me. You're not getting my best if you're not engaged. And I think part of that, and it comes from, I've said it before, like I've had maybe less than a handful of teachers who have really taught me something. High school, college, middle school, through my entire life, my entire educational.
Most of it was life. You just figured it out on your own.
Or I did the best I could to be the Stepford child they wanted, and that was it. So I got my 70 and I moved on.
Some areas, if you're just compliant, then they will just, okay, well he doesn't know it, but he's doing his work all the time, so I'll give him a B.
So I think part of it is the entire system probably needs to get blown up, if I'm being honest, because I think, the example you gave is I could easily fall into either category depending on the teacher you put me in front of. Like you could literally A/B test me if you could clone me and put me in two different classrooms, and depending on the teacher, I'll get it in 6 months or I'll get it in 18, right? Yep. And I think that teachers need to be allowed to change. Like you need to, like, it's not even about test scores. When we're talking about comprehension, not everybody's equal. My mother, I always try and get her to listen to my podcast. My mother's a visual learner. Okay. Right. So because it's audio only, my mother kind of struggles through some of these episodes.
Yeah.
And I understand that. But how are you going to handle my mother, who's a visual learner, if you don't have any graphics or anything visual when you're teaching her? Right. So does that make her dumber than me because I can get it through words? No, it makes us different. And so,
and by the way, also just like you have the kid who's like short until like 4th grade and then ends up being like the tallest kid in the class in 10th grade. It happens with brain development as well. You know what I mean? There's this kid that's like struggling to read on like a 4th grade level in 4th grade. Yeah. All of a sudden in 7th grade, something, like the Grinch, his brain grows 3 sizes that year, and all of a sudden he can like do stuff. And it's like, okay, now like he's good. I'll have kids all the time that go, this used to be, I'll teach them something that they should know from a while back. And they'll be like, why is this so easy now? This was like so hard when I like tried to learn it 2 years ago. I'm like, because your brain has grown, dude. Like that's what happens. I said, you weren't ready for it then, and that's okay. You're ready for it now.
Yeah. I think the other piece to this, which I've only seen bad examples of, but it's one of the reasons I bring it up, is there's a social development that happens in school that can get stunted or mutated based on moving a kid faster than they belong or holding them back, right?
Yeah.
And I do not believe, I think that most of the time, the only places it's handled well is on TV. Yeah. Because they can afford to have the conversation, which is, should we hold Jimmy back? He might, learn more, but maybe we should put him up because that's where his friends are and he might do better with some help around him. Yeah. That's a conversation I feel like is only on TV. It doesn't actually happen necessarily that way. I wouldn't know, but like that's a conversation that is also a piece to all of what we're talking about right now, where it's like, well, what do you do? What do you do? This kid's been with these same 10 kids that have helped him along. And as a teacher, or if especially in the same school district, you can see like, oh, well, Timmy's always helping Bobby, but they always get by. Well, what happens when Timmy can't, or Bobby's not like, what do you do? And are you going to break that up? And that's on you. Like that's.
Yeah. Well, I asked the question. There's no right answer. I don't think I ask the question sometimes. I'll talk to a teacher. Sometimes it's like a newer teacher and they've got this kid and it's this kid that is just, they're doing their best. Right. And their brain isn't developing very well and they are struggling. And I go, okay, so if you fail him and he takes your class again next year, do you think he'll pass that time? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well then, like, move him along, I guess. Just move along. I had this conversation with an admin one time. He was helping, and this is what happens. The conversation that's happening, honestly, is this one. There was this kid. He was like, he was in fights. He was getting high on campus. He was, doing whatever he could, and they had a special ed teacher. He wasn't in special ed, but they had a special ed teacher that just had some free time going around to each teacher, writing down all the things that, and these agreements with these teachers. If Johnny does X, Y, and Z, then you'll pass him.
Yeah.
And I go to the admin, I go, this is one of the most like
bizarre things. Yeah.
Yeah. Like all these other kids that like actually want to learn and they're not getting this individualized thing. He goes, listen, he goes, next year, the middle school's going to send me 5 more of him. He goes, I need to make room. I can't have 6 of them on campus. I got to get 1 gone, And that's what the middle school is doing. The middle school's like, listen, if we keep this kid, he's going to be getting these other kids high and having sex with the 6th grader and beating up the other one. I'm like, we need to get him out of here and make him the high school's problem now.